My name is James Clark, and I'm 70 years old, sitting here alone in my Chicago home that once echoed with the laughter of family gatherings, but now feels like a war zone where my 3 children have turned my remaining years into a battlefield over money I haven't even died to leave them yet. 6 months ago, I made the mistake of mentioning that I was updating my will, and within weeks, my own children transformed from loving family members into cold, calculating predators who now see me not as their father, but as a walking inheritance that they're competing to claim before I'm even in the ground. I'd love to know where you're listening from today, so please share your location in the comments below. And if this story moves you, I hope you'll consider subscribing, because what happened to me shows how greed can poison family relationships and turn children into strangers who view their parents as nothing more than potential wealth. Let me start by telling you about the family I thought I had built, so you can understand how devastating it has been to discover that the people I raised and loved see me primarily as a source of money, rather than as their father. I worked for 42 years as a senior engineer for a major manufacturing company in Chicago, building a career that provided well for my family and allowed me to accumulate substantial savings and assets over the decades. My wife Eleanor and I raised 3 children in a beautiful 4-bedroom house in Lincoln Park, where we created what I believe were strong family bonds built on love, respect, and shared values. We emphasized education, hard work, and treating others with kindness, and I was proud of the adults our children became and the successful lives they built for themselves. Robert is my eldest at 45, a successful investment banker who lives in a mansion in Winnetka with his wife and 2 teenage children. He's always been ambitious and driven, qualities that served him well in his career, but sometimes made him seem calculating and focused on material success above other considerations. Sarah is 42 and works as a corporate attorney for a major law firm downtown. She's brilliant and accomplished, but she's also developed a sense of entitlement over the years that sometimes makes her seem cold and demanding. She's divorced and has 1 daughter who she's raising as a single mother while building her legal career. My youngest, Michael, is 39 and owns a small but successful marketing agency. He's always been the most creative and artistic of my children, but he's also struggled financially at times and has often looked to me for assistance with business expenses or personal financial challenges. Eleanor passed away from lung cancer 4 years ago, and losing her was devastating for all of us. She had been the emotional heart of our family, the one who organized gatherings, remembered birthdays, and maintained connections that kept us close. After her death, I worried about how our family would stay together without her unifying presence. Initially, my children seemed to rally around me and each other in our shared grief. They visited more frequently, called regularly, and made efforts to maintain family traditions and holiday celebrations. I was touched by their attention and grateful that Eleanor's death had brought us closer together rather than driving us apart. But I now realize that their increased attention after Eleanor's death was motivated more by concern about their inheritance than by genuine care for my well-being. Eleanor had always handled our financial planning and estate management, and her death made my children acutely aware that they didn't know the details of my assets or my plans for distributing them. The subtle inquiries about my finances began about a year after Eleanor's funeral. During family dinners or casual conversations, one of my children would ask questions about my retirement accounts, the value of the house, or my plans for the future. They framed these questions as concern for my security and well-being, but I could sense an underlying interest in understanding their potential inheritance. I was uncomfortable discussing financial details with my children because I believed that such conversations were inappropriate while I was still alive and capable of managing my own affairs. I gave vague answers about being financially secure and assured them that they would all be provided for when the time came, but I didn't share specific numbers or details about my estate planning. My evasiveness about money seemed to frustrate my children and led to more persistent questioning and subtle pressure to involve them in my financial decisions. Robert, with his background in finance, offered to help me manage my investments and retirement planning. Sarah suggested that I needed legal advice about estate taxes and wealth preservation strategies. Michael asked if I needed help with budgeting or expense management. All of these offers were presented as loving assistance from concerned children who wanted to help their aging father manage complex financial matters. But I sensed an underlying agenda that made me uncomfortable, a feeling that my children were more interested in protecting their future inheritance than in ensuring my current security and independence. The situation became more complicated when I decided to update my will and estate planning documents in early 2023. Eleanor and I had created our wills many years earlier, and her death required me to revise the documents to reflect my new circumstances as a widower. I also wanted to ensure that my assets would be distributed fairly among my children and grandchildren. When I mentioned to my children that I was working with an attorney to update my will, their reactions were immediate and intense. Instead of simple acknowledgement or offers of assistance, each child began a campaign to influence my decisions and ensure that their interests were protected in the new documents. Robert was the first to become aggressive in his approach to influencing my estate planning. He scheduled a lunch meeting where he presented detailed analyses of my financial situation and recommendations for structuring my will to minimize taxes and maximize the inheritance for my descendants. His presentation was professional and thorough, but it felt more like a business proposal than a family conversation. Robert argued that as the eldest child and the one with the most financial expertise, he should serve as the executor of my estate and have the primary responsibility for managing my assets after my death. He suggested that his brothers were too irresponsible or inexperienced to handle such important responsibilities, and that my estate would be better protected under his management. Sarah took a different approach, using her legal expertise to research estate planning strategies and present me with complicated documents about trust structures and tax avoidance schemes. She argued that my current plans were outdated and potentially harmful to my family's financial interests, and that I needed sophisticated legal strategies to protect my wealth from government taxation. Sarah also suggested that she should be appointed as the executor of my estate because of her legal background and understanding of probate procedures. She implied that Robert's financial focus would lead to risky investment strategies that could jeopardize the family's inheritance, and that my estate needed legal protection more than financial management. Michael's approach was more emotional and personal, focusing on his financial struggles and his need for inheritance to stabilize his business and provide security for his future. He reminded me of the financial assistance I had provided him over the years and suggested that this pattern of support should be reflected in a larger share of my estate. Michael argued that Robert and Sarah were already financially successful and didn't need inheritance money as much as he did. He suggested that equal distribution of my assets would be unfair because it wouldn't account for the different financial circumstances and needs of my children. As each child pressed their case for favorable treatment in my will, they also began undermining their siblings' claims and relationships with me. Robert would make comments about Sarah's expensive lifestyle and questionable spending decisions. Sarah would criticize Michael's business management and suggest that giving him money was like throwing it away. Michael would point out that his siblings were wealthy enough to take care of themselves and didn't need my money. The competition between my children created a toxic atmosphere that poisoned every family interaction. Holiday gatherings became tense affairs where each child tried to position themselves as my favorite while subtly criticizing their siblings. Phone calls and visits felt like lobbying sessions rather than genuine family connections. I began to feel like I was being courted by three competing suitors who were all trying to win my favor for purely mercenary reasons. My children's attention and affection seemed conditional on their belief that they were winning the inheritance competition, and their treatment of each other became increasingly hostile and manipulative. The situation reached a breaking point during Thanksgiving dinner, when the underlying tensions erupted into open conflict. Robert made a comment about Michael's financial irresponsibility. Michael responded by criticizing Robert's greed and entitlement, and Sarah inserted herself into the argument by suggesting that both of her brothers were being inappropriate. The argument escalated quickly, with each child making accusations about the other's motives and character while trying to position themselves as the most deserving recipient of my inheritance. They spoke about me as if I wasn't there, discussing my assets and their claims to them like I was already dead and they were dividing up my estate. I was horrified and heartbroken by this display of greed and sibling rivalry, and I finally exploded with anger and disappointment. I told my children that they were acting like vultures circling around a corpse, and that their behavior was destroying our family and making my remaining years miserable. But instead of being ashamed or apologetic, My children seemed to view my anger as evidence that I was being manipulated by their siblings and needed protection from bad influences. Each child doubled down on their efforts to curry favor with me while isolating me from their siblings. Robert suggested that I should limit my contact with Sarah and Michael because they were clearly trying to manipulate me for financial gain. He offered to help me manage my social interactions and protect me from family members who might take advantage of my generosity or emotional vulnerability. Sarah made similar suggestions about Robert and Michael, arguing that I needed legal protection from family members who might try to exploit my age or health issues to gain access to my assets. She offered to review any documents or agreements before I signed them to ensure that my interests were protected. Michael took a more emotional approach, suggesting that Robert and Sarah were cold and calculating people who didn't really love me but only cared about money. He positioned himself as the only child who truly cared about my well-being and happiness rather than my financial assets. These competing efforts to isolate me from my other children created an impossible situation where any attention I gave to one child was interpreted by the others as favoritism or manipulation. If I had lunch with Robert, Sarah and Michael would accuse me of being influenced by his financial schemes. If I spent time with Sarah, Robert and Michael would suggest that she was trying to manipulate my legal decisions. If I helped Michael with business expenses, Robert and Sarah would criticize me for enabling his irresponsibility. I found myself walking on eggshells around my own children, afraid that any interaction would be misinterpreted or used as ammunition in their ongoing competition. Family gatherings became strategic events where I had to carefully balance my attention and conversation to avoid appearing to favor any particular child. The stress and emotional toll of managing these competing relationships was exhausting and depressing. Instead of enjoying my retirement years surrounded by loving family, I was constantly mediating conflicts and trying to prevent my children from destroying their relationships with each other over money I hadn't even died to leave them. I began to question whether I should change my will to disinherit all of my children and leave my money to charity instead. The thought of rewarding their greedy and manipulative behavior with substantial inheritances seemed wrong, but I also didn't want to punish them for being human and flawed in ways that many people might understand. The situation became even more complicated when my children began involving their own families in the inheritance competition. Robert's wife started making comments about the grandchildren's educational expenses and the importance of providing for the next generation. Sarah's teenage daughter began asking pointed questions about my health and my plans for future. Michael's girlfriend suggested that I should consider the financial struggles of small business owners when making estate planning decisions. Even my grandchildren, who I had always believed loved me unconditionally, began to seem motivated by potential financial benefits rather than genuine affection. Their visits felt scripted and artificial, with conversations that seemed designed to demonstrate their worthiness of inheritance rather than to build genuine relationships. I realized that my children had corrupted our entire family structure by turning inheritance into a competition that involved every family member. Instead of teaching their children about love, respect, and family values, they were teaching them to view their grandfather as a source of wealth that requires strategic manipulation to access. The final straw came 6 months ago when I discovered that my children had been secretly meeting with each other to coordinate their strategies for influencing my estate planning decisions. Despite their public competition and mutual criticism, they had been working together behind the scenes to ensure that my inheritance remained within the family rather than going to charity or other beneficiaries. This discovery showed me that even their apparent conflicts were partially calculated and artificial, designed to make me believe that they were acting independently rather than as a coordinated group with shared financial interests. Their manipulation was even more sophisticated and calculated than I had realized. I felt completely betrayed and disillusioned by this revelation, and I made a decision to cut off contact with all 3 of my children until they could demonstrate that they were capable of relating to me as their father rather than as a source of money. I told them that their inheritance competition had destroyed our family relationships and that I needed space to decide how to handle my estate planning in light of their behavior. The responses to my withdrawal from the family were predictable and disappointing. Instead of self-reflection or attempts to repair our relationships, my children focus on protecting their financial interests and positioning themselves advantageously for when I eventually resume contact with them. Robert hired an attorney to research his legal rights regarding my estate and to explore options for challenging any will that didn't provide him with adequate inheritance. Sarah began researching my mental health and competency, apparently preparing to argue that any changes to my will were the result of diminished capacity or outside manipulation. Michael started documenting his financial struggles and his history of receiving assistance from me, building a case for why he deserved preferential treatment in my estate planning. These responses confirmed my worst fears about my children's priorities and motivations. Even when confronted with the destruction of our family relationships, their primary concern was protecting their access to my money, rather than rebuilding the love and trust that should characterize parent-child relationships. For the past 6 months, I've been living in isolation from my children, spending my time reflecting on how our family relationships became so poisoned by money and greed. I've also been working with therapists who specializes in family dynamics and estate planning conflicts to help me understand how to move forward. The loneliness has been profound and painful, but it's also been clarifying. Without the constant pressure and manipulation from my children, I've been able to think clearly about what kind of legacy I want to leave and what values I want to promote through my estate planning decisions. I've also connected with other elderly people who have experienced similar conflicts with their adult children over inheritance issues. These support group discussions have helped me understand that my situation is unfortunately common, and that many families are destroyed by greed and competition over assets that haven't even been inherited yet. But something unexpected happened last month that gave me hope for potentially rebuilding relationships with my children on a healthier foundation. I received a letter from Michael expressing genuine remorse for his behavior and asking if we could meet to discuss repairing our relationship without any reference to money or inheritance. Michael's letter acknowledged that he and his siblings had allowed greed to corrupt their relationships with me and with each other. He expressed shame about his behavior and indicated that he had been in therapy to understand how his financial insecurities had led him to treat his father as a source of wealth rather than as a person deserving love and respect. Most importantly, Michael stated that he was no longer interested in discussing inheritance or estate planning, and that he wanted to rebuild our relationship based on genuine affection and family connection rather than financial considerations. He offered to sign a legal document waiving any claim to inheritance if that would help me feel more comfortable about resuming our relationship. I was cautiously hopeful about Michael's apparent change of heart, and I agreed to meet with him for coffee to discuss the possibility of rebuilding our relationship. The conversation was emotional and difficult, but it felt genuine in a way that our interactions hadn't for years. Michael admitted that he had been primarily motivated by money in his relationship with me, and that he had lost sight of the father-son bond that should have been more important than any financial considerations. He expressed regret about the pain his behavior had caused and indicated that he was committed to changing his approach to our relationship. We've had several additional meetings over the past month, and slowly, I'm beginning to believe that Michael's remorse is genuine and that he's capable of relating to me as his father rather than as a source of inheritance. These conversations have given me hope that it might be possible to rebuild healthy relationships with my children based on love rather than greed. I've also heard indirectly that Robert and Sarah have been affected by Michael's decision to step away from the inheritance competition. While they haven't contacted me directly, mutual friends have indicated that they're beginning to question their own behavior and to consider whether their focus on money has damaged their relationships with their father. Dr. Patricia Williams, the family therapist I've been working with, has offered to facilitate family sessions that could help all of us address the damage that's been done and work toward rebuilding our relationships on a healthier foundation. She believes that with professional guidance and genuine commitment from all parties, it might be possible to heal the wounds that greed has created in our family. Today, I'm cautiously optimistic that my children and I might be able to move past the inheritance competition that nearly destroyed our family. While the scars from their behavior will always remain, I'm beginning to hope that we can build new relationships based on a love and respect that should characterize family bonds. I've also made some changes to my estate planning that reflect what I've learned about my children's characters and motivations. While I still plan to provide for them financially, I've structured my will in ways that promote family unity and discourage the kind of competition and manipulation that cause so much damage to our relationships. Most importantly, I've learned that money can poison even the strongest family relationships if it becomes more important than love, respect, and genuine connection. The experience has been painful but educational, and I hope that sharing my story can help other families avoid the destructive patterns that nearly destroyed mine. That's my story. How my children turned my will into a battlefield and competed for my inheritance while I was still alive, but how one son's genuine remorse opened the door to healing and redemption for our entire family. Sometimes the worst family conflicts can become opportunities for deeper understanding and stronger relationships. If people are willing to choose love over greed,